Story 1. I picked up a load that wasn't on the manifest, but it knew my name. This happened to me in 2019, somewhere outside of Laramie, Wyoming. I'd been on the road 10 hours straight and was just about to hit my stopping point when dispatch pinged me. New load assignment. That was nothing unusual in itself. Sometimes clients make last-minute calls and we jump, but this one was weird from the start. It showed up in my manifest at 5:16 p.m. The system marked it high priority, with a scanned signature already filed under my name, but I hadn't signed anything. I pulled over at a rest area and got on the horn with dispatch, told them I hadn't picked up any new load and definitely hadn't signed off on anything. They asked me to confirm the job ID. I read it out. Long pause on the other end. "You're saying you didn't authorize this?" my dispatcher asked. "No, I'm not even in the area it says I was when I signed it." Another pause. Then she said, "Hold on." A couple minutes later, she sent me a photo. It was a scanned signature line on a digital manifest. Underneath, plain as day, my name, time-stamped, GPS tagged. Except it wasn't my signature, at least not the way I write it now. The handwriting looked familiar but off, more curved, overly loopy. It took me a few seconds to place it. That was how I used to sign my name in middle school. I hadn't written like that in over 20 years. I stared at it for a long time. The rest of the manifest had all the standard formatting. The client was listed as Ecotrans Logistics, which I'd never heard of. No phone number, no contact name. Delivery destination was listed as Private Transfer Zone, Parcel 1187B. I asked dispatch what that was. They didn't know, said it was listed as internal, but the system had marked it verified. "Want me to remove it?" the dispatcher asked. I hesitated. There was something about seeing my name like that. Not the name itself, but the way it looked. Like someone who knew me before I became who I am now. Before I changed. I told her no, said I'd check it out myself. I was only 30 miles from the pickup site, a small private yard off a frontage road. It wasn't lit, just chain link and gravel, with one motion light that clicked on when I pulled in. The gate was already open. Manifest check-in was marked auto-verified. No one there. I backed into the only dock and waited. At 6:24 p.m., and the door alarm buzzed. Someone had loaded something into my trailer. It registered as 214 pounds, no other info, just listed as Crate Duggar 77A. I checked the rear camera. No footage. My trailer cam had frozen 2 minutes prior. I walked out and did a physical check. No one was around, not a soul. But the crate was there, standard wood box, sealed with black industrial straps. No labels, no documents. I scanned it in just to see what would happen. The manifest updated instantly. Delivery confirmed, ETA auto-routed. I stood there in the cold, watching the loading dock lights flicker slightly. The air felt thinner than usual. Not cold, but close. Still. I went back to the cab and tried to shake it off. That night, I kept thinking about that signature. The loops, the curl on the R, how the lowercase e curled backwards at the tail. I used to sign birthday cards like that in 5th grade. I had the flu once and signed my get well note to my mum exactly that way. I remember her smiling and saying she'd keep it. She died in 2009. By morning, I was halfway through Colorado and the crate hadn't moved an inch. But something about the way it was loaded, slightly off-center, just a hair too far to the left, made me feel like it wasn't cargo. It was waiting. I called dispatch again, just to ask one more time if they could trace the pickup origin. They said the load didn't come from any of our known clients. It had been injected manually into our system through an outdated API we hadn't used since 2013. I asked them to freeze the manifest, maybe lock the order. They tried, but the job had already been marked completed in a sublayer of the routing system, as if I had already delivered it. I pulled off the highway just before dusk. The sky was overcast but not raining, the kind of gray that feels heavier than it should. I'd been driving in silence for over an hour. No music, no podcasts. Just the hum of tires and that low, invisible pressure behind my eyes. I needed to see it again. I parked in a gravel turnout and made my way around the side of the trailer. The crate was exactly where it had been. Left wall, near the front of the trailer. But this time, the air back there felt different, colder. I stepped inside the trailer, and it was like stepping into an attic that hadn't been opened in decades, not musty, not stale, just preserved. The walls felt closer in that moment. I walked toward the crate. It looked ordinary. Scuffed wood, reinforced corners, dark metal straps. Nothing unusual. I reached out and placed my hand against it. Immediately, the surface of the wood turned cold, not from the temperature. It felt more like it was rejecting warmth, pulling it out of my skin. That's when I heard it. A sound. Barely there. So faint I wasn't sure I heard anything at all. But I froze and leaned closer. And then I heard it again, whispering. It wasn't inside my head, it was around me, like a current of sound moving through the metal of the trailer itself. A woman's voice, soft, not distressed, calling a name, my name, but not the way anyone says it now. She used the nickname only my mother had ever used, and she didn't just say it once. She repeated it, slow, deliberate, 3 times. I stumbled backwards, hands still tingling. My first thought was that someone had hidden a speaker in there, but I knew better. This wasn't mechanical. There was no power, no vibration, just that voice, low, intimate. It was her, or something that had heard her speak to me once long ago. The whisper faded the second I stepped out of the trailer. The warmth returned instantly, as if it had never left. I sat in the cab for over 20 minutes, engine idling, door open, just breathing, trying to find the version of myself that didn't believe what I'd just heard. I didn't call dispatch again. I didn't file a report. I kept driving, but every 30 miles or so, I checked the rearview camera, even though it hadn't worked since the pickup. I was afraid I'd see someone sitting next to the crate, not moving, just watching. The delivery address was listed as Parcel 1187B, clearance exempt. It wasn't in a city. The GPS took me down a long, unlit road flanked by dry trees and open fence line. There were no signs, no mailboxes, just an old gravel turnoff and a gate already wide open. I followed it for half a mile, and there it was, a single abandoned farmhouse, no lights, windows boarded from the inside, roof partially collapsed. I stopped the truck and checked the system. The location matched. Delivery verified. I opened the trailer. The crate was no longer cold, but it looked heavier somehow, like it had absorbed the miles. I left it near the porch. No one came out. No lights. No sound. The minute I stepped back inside the cab, my manifest pinged again. Load delivered. Job complete. I checked the trailer cam one more time. Nothing. Still black. I pulled away slowly. About half a mile down the road, I glanced in my side mirror. That's when I saw it. Someone walking, in the same lane I had just driven through, carrying the crate, cradled in both arms like it was nothing, their outline blurred in the dusk like heat off asphalt. I couldn't see their face. They raised one hand and waved, not frantic, not beckoning, just waving. Like they knew I'd be looking back. I didn't stop. I drove until my fuel light came on and didn't sleep that night. The crate never got logged in our system again. The delivery company vanished from our records a week later, but I can still see that wave in my mind. Like it wasn't just a goodbye, it was a reminder of who had signed for that load and how they'd known exactly which name to use. Story 2. The same car followed me for 8 hours, but it never needed gas. This happened to me in 2021. I was hauling a time-sensitive refrigerated load out of Amarillo, heading west into Arizona. The run was long but clean. Back roads for the first few hours, then onto I-40. I'd done this route a dozen times before. Same exits, same speed traps, same tired stretches of desert and brush. It was around 4:30 in the morning when I first noticed the car. A dark blue sedan. No visible damage, no weird behavior, just a clean vehicle riding a few lengths behind me in the right lane. It was early enough that the road was basically mine, no headlights in the opposite lane, no trucks coming up behind. But the sedan stayed exactly where it was, quiet, distant, like it belonged there. I switched lanes just to shake off the feeling. The car mirrored me, not instantly. It waited maybe 10 seconds, but then it followed. I slowed slightly, letting it pass. It didn't. It just kept pace, always staying the same distance back. No pressure, no signals, no honks. I chalked it up to coincidence. Maybe they were just a fellow driver zoning out. Maybe someone new to the route. You get a lot of that at this hour. People driving on muscle memory, eyes open but not seeing. By 6 a.m., I'd passed through Gallup. The sky had lightened, but the car was still there. Same lane, same distance, no movement. I started watching more closely. Whenever I exited to refuel or stretch my legs, they didn't follow. But the moment I got back on the road, they were behind me again. No delay, no lost time. Once, I pulled off for 15 minutes at a truck stop, walked into the shop, used the bathroom, stood in front of the vending machine staring at nothing. I even pretended to make a phone call before getting back in the cab. 10 minutes back on the highway, the car reappeared. Perfect following distance. Not too close. Not far enough to lose. It became a routine. I'd change lanes. It followed. I'd take ramps. It followed. Even when the highway split and I took the lesser-traveled detour near Sanders, a road I almost never take, the car still found its way behind me. I tried to dismiss it as nerves. 8 hours alone on the road messes with your sense of scale. You start seeing patterns in traffic that aren't really there. You hear songs in the hum of the tires, faces in the dust on the windshield. But this wasn't in my head. I knew because when I passed the same stretch of fencing twice, an old wooden gate with private land spray-painted across 3 panels, I looked in the mirror and saw the same blue sedan easing into view again. I leaned out the window at one point, tried to get a better look. The windshield of the car had a glare, or maybe a tint. I couldn't see inside, not even an outline. That's when it really started bothering me. This car had followed me through nearly every terrain. Curves, hills, detours, switchbacks, and not once did I see it pull off for gas. That might not sound strange on paper, but I'd clocked 480 miles since Amarillo. I had to fuel up once already. Most cars would have needed it by now, but this one didn't stop, not even once. And I started to realize something else. I'd never seen its brake lights, not at a turn, not at an exit, not in traffic. It just flowed, like water behind a rock. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just coincidence, some other driver with a long haul, maybe even another trucker's partner driving behind in a rental. That happens sometimes. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like this car wasn't sharing the road with me. It was following me, intentionally, with rules I didn't understand. It was just after noon when I stopped at a rest area outside of Winslow. I hadn't seen the car in maybe 20 minutes, figured it had finally taken a turn or exited somewhere I didn't notice. The lot was mostly empty. A couple of parked rigs, one SUV, and a sedan near the far edge. Not blue, not the same model. I stepped out, stretched, and did a quick walk around, grabbed some jerky from the cab, and checked my tires. When I got to the rear bumper, I saw it. 3 large letters written in the dust that had caked along the trailer's surface. WHY not scratched. Written with a fingertip by the look of it. The lines were long, deliberate. My first reaction was disbelief. Then I started scanning the lot, looking for anyone close, but there was no one near enough to have done it. The 2 truckers by the vending machines were chatting. The SUV was locked up. The other sedan was empty. I grabbed a rag and wiped the message off, then stared at the smudge it left behind. It hadn't rained. The dust layer was thick, undisturbed everywhere else. The only prints were the 3 letters and a faint curved mark beneath them, a thumb. Someone had leaned their hand on the trailer while writing. I got back into the truck, locked the doors, and sat there for a while. There was no reason to be scared. That's what I kept telling myself. It's just someone messing around, another driver, a bored local, a prank. But the longer I stared at my mirrors, the less I believed that. Eventually, I pulled back onto the highway. 30 minutes later, I checked my rear camera out of habit. The sedan was back, same distance, same position. I felt my jaw tighten. I focused on the road and tried not to look again. But an hour later, when I finally worked up the nerve to check the trailer again at a fuel stop, there was another message. Same spot. Rear bumper, fresh, different letters this time. You remember my stomach went cold because the handwriting looked different now. Not in style, in intent. It was angled, leaning in, as if whoever wrote it was pushing the words at me. You remember. I wiped it again, checked the fuel lot. Empty. The air was heavy, still, and I noticed something I hadn't before. My hands were shaking. I'd been driving for over 8 hours now, no sleep, just that endless hum, and that car. I leaned against the side of the truck trying to collect myself. What did I remember? What was I supposed to? And how would anyone else know? I climbed back into the cab, sat still for a long time before starting the engine. In the mirror there was nothing, but once I was back on the highway, it returned. Not immediately, maybe 20 minutes later, but then there it was. Blue, clean, no driver visible, matching me, mile for mile. I hit the way station near Kingman around 3:40 p.m. The place was empty, just one DOT officer and an old flatbed ahead of me. I figured it was a good place to finally stop for real. I was overdue for rest, and my logs were nearly at max. I went through the motions, checked in, logged my off-duty hours. The officer barely looked at me, just waved me through with a tablet and told me to pull to the far right. I did. When I shut the engine off, the silence was overwhelming. It was like stepping off a moving walkway. Everything slowed, but the noise kept echoing in my ears. I stepped out, looked around. No blue sedan. No one had followed me in. The highway behind the station curved sharply, so it was easy to see both directions. Nothing. I stood there for a while, unsure what I wanted to see more. The car, or the absence of it. Eventually, I went back to the cab and reclined the seat. I must have dozed off, maybe 30 minutes, maybe more. When I woke up, it was dark. I blinked a few times and reached for my thermos, but it wasn't where I'd left it. I looked around. Then I saw something on the dashboard, a single folded paper. It hadn't been there before. I didn't touch it at first, just stared. It was plain, no markings, no stains. I picked it up with 2 fingers and unfolded it. One line, handwritten in sharp block letters. We needed to see how far you'd run before you recognized the passenger seat was never empty. That was it. No name, no threat, just that sentence. My whole body froze. I looked to my right. The passenger seat was the same as always. Coffee stains, GPS unit, old clipboard. Empty. But the longer I stared, the more I remembered something I hadn't allowed myself to think about in years. The passenger seat used to be full. Years ago, I drove these same roads with my younger brother. We split shifts, same cab, same logbook. Until one night outside of Tucumcari, when he got out to check a trailer latch that had come loose. He never came back in. I searched for him. We called State Patrol. They found nothing. No tracks, no signs of struggle. Just one bent latch, hanging loose. I hadn't thought about it in years, but now I couldn't stop. I looked down at the note again. It wasn't an accusation. It was a reminder. The car, the messages, the voice in the silence of the road. They weren't asking questions. They were waiting for me to remember. I crumpled the note, but I didn't throw it away. I just sat there for a long time, headlights off, the way station quiet around me, waiting like something still riding shotgun. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. The CB radio started picking up a signal, but I was in the desert, alone. This happened to me in 2022. I was running a solo haul through the Sonoran Desert, a straight 400-mile run from Phoenix to a drop site just outside of Mexicali. Simple job, light load, no deadlines. I was expecting an uneventful night, no radio chatter, no other rigs, just me, the road, and sand stretching in every direction. The CB was set to channel 19, as always. It had been silent for over an hour, which wasn't surprising. Out there, radio silence is normal. That part of the desert doesn't get much traffic after dusk, and I'd already passed the last convoy outside Yuma. I switched the dial to channel 9 for a bit, just to test for life. Dead air. I flipped through a few more channels. Nothing. Static here and there, a few pops. I figured I'd keep it on scan and let it rotate through the frequencies. That's when I heard it. Click. Just that. A single sharp key-on blip. It made me pause. The scanner stopped on channel 23, then nothing. I leaned forward and stared at the unit. Waited. Nothing but the low hum of the carrier wave. I keyed the mic. Anyone out there? Silence. I waited another few seconds before switching back to 19. A few minutes passed. Then, click. Static. Then a voice. Still listening? The voice was male. Calm. Measured. No accent. It wasn't a question. It was more like confirmation. Like he already knew I was listening. Then, we were hoping you'd stay awake tonight. And the line cut. I sat there for a second, frozen, hand hovering over the mic. Then I keyed in again. This is 17 Echo, confirming who's on this frequency. Repeat, confirm broadcast origin. Nothing. I flipped to 22. Dead. Back to 23. Static. Then clear as a bell. That's not who you are tonight. My chest tightened. I shut off the CB. For a few miles I drove in silence, trying to tell myself it was just someone screwing around. A fellow trucker bored on a long route. A prank. Some loner with a ham radio and too much time. But Channel 23 isn't usually open. It's technically outside the common civilian band, not illegal but off-grid, to pick me up by name. That wasn't a guess. And stay awake tonight? That wasn't a prank. That was a directive. The night dragged. The road flattened out into that long, hypnotic stretch where the land loses depth and the sky feels lower. My dashboard clock read 2:08 a.m. I hadn't seen another vehicle in almost an hour. I left the CB off, but the silence started to feel unnatural. Even in a dead zone, you usually catch faint static, bleed from AM stations, wind feedback from the antenna. But there was nothing. No hum. No white noise, just absolute silence, like the air itself had muted. That's when I started hearing it. Not from the CB, from behind me, a dragging sound, slow, metal on rubber, or something coarse pulling across the floor. I froze with my hands on the wheel and waited for it to stop. It didn't. It kept going, just behind the wall of the cab, in the sleeper. I pulled over without even realizing I'd done it. Left the engine idling and climbed down, flashlight in hand. The desert around me was quiet, moonless, still. I opened the rear cab door. There was nothing visibly out of place, but the dragging sound had stopped. I stepped inside. The sleeper was as I'd left it, unmade bunk, small cooler, the curtain half pulled. But on the mattress, sitting dead center, was a small black cassette recorder. It hadn't been there before. I don't use tapes, never have. I picked it up slowly. It was already running, reel to reel. A tiny red light blinking. I stopped it, rewound 5 seconds, pressed play, and heard my own voice. Still listening? We were hoping you'd stay awake tonight. I almost dropped it. It was the exact phrase from earlier, the one I'd heard over the CB, except I never recorded anything. I don't have any equipment in the cab that would capture that. And the voice, it was mine, not just similar, identical, inflection, tone, timing. I played it again, my voice, saying something I had never said. I checked the recorder casing, no markings, no labels, just a cassette marked Side B in red pen. I opened the player. There was no side A anywhere. I looked around the sleeper again, under the bunk, in the cooler, behind the curtain. Nothing. The dragging sound didn't return, but I left the recorder on the mattress and shut the sleeper door. Back in the driver's seat, I sat with the engine running and watched the empty road ahead. I hadn't hallucinated the signal. I hadn't imagined the words. They were real, and somehow, they were mine. I reached a gas station outside El Centro around 5:30 a.m., just past the county line. Little place. Only 2 pumps, a busted vending machine, and a cashier inside who looked like he hadn't blinked in an hour. I parked and went inside, trying to look normal. He didn't speak, just nodded once. I grabbed a bottle of water and asked, "You get much CB bleed through out here?" He didn't answer right away, just stared past me, like he was waiting for a different question. So I asked it again. "You ever pick up strange chatter on radio bands?" Still nothing. Then he said, without moving his gaze, "That's not radio." I stopped mid-sip. He continued, still staring out the window. "That's the desert remembering who passes through." He looked at me then. "It keeps the voices, in case you forget your own." I put the water down. "What did you say?" He didn't repeat it. He just pointed behind me. There was a bulletin board next to the restroom door, half covered in faded flyers and pins. But one thing caught my eye, a piece of yellowed tape stuck haphazardly over a note card. It read, "Echo ID 1 to 7. No replies past mile 267. Ignore reverse loop audio. Do not engage." I stared at it for a long time. The handwriting was blocky, neat, familiar. It was mine. I didn't say anything to the clerk. I left the bottle, walked out into the rising light. When I got back to the truck, the CB was still off. The tape recorder was gone. In its place, sitting neatly on the mattress, was a strip of paper torn from a logbook, the kind I used during training. Written on it, "The desert doesn't forget, even if you do." I haven't driven that route since. But sometimes at night, if I let the CB scan, I still hear it, a click, then static, then a voice I almost recognize, asking if I'm still awake.